Chloe Harper was not your average teenager. At just 17 years old, she had already mastered the art of making people roll their eyes. Teachers, classmates, even strangers at the grocery store. Her long dark hair always seemed perfectly styled, her clothes screamed designer labels, and her attitude, well, let's just say it could fill a room faster than her presence ever could. Chloe lived in an upscale suburb where money flowed as freely as the gossip among neighbors. But while most kids her age were busy trying to figure out college applications or part-time jobs, Chloe spent her days chasing thrills and testing limits. She wasn't born this way, or at least, that's what her parents liked to believe. When Chloe was younger, she had been sweet, curious, and full of energy. Her laughter would light up the house, and her report cards often came back with glowing remarks about her intelligence and creativity. But somewhere along the line, things changed. Maybe it was the constant praise from adults who saw her as perfect because of her grades and charm, or maybe it was the endless stream of privileges handed to her without question. Whatever the reason, by the time Chloe turned 15, she had morphed into someone unrecognizable. Her rebellion started small. Skipping class here, sneaking out there. It escalated quickly when she discovered parties. Loud music, flashing lights, and the thrill of doing something forbidden became her new favorite pastime. Alcohol flowed freely at these gatherings, and Chloe didn't hesitate to join in. She told herself it was no big deal. Everyone else was drinking too. Besides, she was smart enough to know her limits, or so she thought. One fateful Friday night, Chloe's world took a sharp turn. After attending yet another party, she decided to drive home despite having had more than a few drinks. Her judgment clouded. She misjudged a curve on the quiet suburban road and crashed straight into her neighbor's mailbox. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the damage to both the car and the property was significant. Word spread fast in their tight-knit community, and soon enough, Chloe found herself sitting in a courtroom, staring down a judge who looked less than impressed. The first hearing should have been a wake-up call. Judge Margaret Ellis, known for her stern demeanor and zero tolerance for nonsense, listened carefully as the prosecutor laid out the details of Chloe's reckless behavior. When it was Chloe's turn to speak, instead of apologizing, she rolled her eyes and muttered under her breath. Her lawyer nudged her sharply, urging her to show some respect, but Chloe simply crossed her arms and slouched further in her seat. "Young lady," Judge Ellis said firmly, leaning forward, "do you understand the seriousness of what you've done?" Chloe shrugged. "Yeah, whatever. I messed up. Can we move on now?" The courtroom fell silent. Even her parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, embarrassed by their daughter's blatant disrespect. Judge Ellis narrowed her eyes but remained calm. Instead of handing down a harsh punishment right away, she gave Chloe a chance to prove she could change. She ordered mandatory sobriety testing twice a week, community service hours, and a strict curfew. Chloe groaned audibly, earning disapproving glances from everyone around her. But the real trouble began when Chloe decided to ignore the rules entirely. Sobriety testing? Inconvenient. Community service? Boring. Curfew? A joke. She skipped her first scheduled test, claiming she had better things to do. Her friends laughed it off, encouraging her defiance. Her parents, however, weren't amused. They begged her to take the situation seriously, warning her that Judge Ellis wouldn't tolerate such behavior. But Chloe waved them off, confident that her family's wealth and connections would protect her from any real consequences. What Chloe failed to realize was that Judge Ellis wasn't like other judges. She had seen countless teenagers like Chloe come through her courtroom, privileged, arrogant, and convinced they were untouchable, and every single one of them left with a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Chloe's refusal to comply with the court's orders set the stage for what would become a life-altering experience, one she could never have anticipated. Little did Chloe know, her actions were about to lead her down a path far removed from the comfort of her privileged life. For now, though, she remained blissfully unaware, secure in her belief that the world revolved around her. But sometimes, reality has a way of stepping in to deliver a much-needed reality check, and Chloe was about to get hers in the most unexpected way possible. Chloe Harper's defiance wasn't new. In fact, it had been building for years like a storm brewing on the horizon. Her parents often joked that they were raising a little rebel, but deep down, they knew it was more than teenage rebellion. It was entitlement. Chloe had grown up with everything handed to her. Designer clothes, the latest gadgets, private tutoring, and vacations in exotic locations. She didn't know what it meant to want something and not get it. And because she'd never faced real consequences for her actions, she believed she could bend the rules however she pleased. Her pattern of bad behavior started innocently enough. At first, it was skipping chores or ignoring her curfew by an hour or two. But as time went on, her actions became bolder. By the time she turned 16, Chloe had mastered the art of manipulation. If she wanted to go out with friends on a school night, she'd guilt-trip her mom into letting her. When she got caught sneaking out late, she'd blame her dad for being too strict, turning their arguments into opportunities to escape punishment. It was almost like a game to her, a way to prove how clever she was. Her parents tried to intervene, of course. They grounded her, took away her phone, and even installed tracking software on her car. But nothing worked. Every restriction only fueled her determination to break free. One Saturday morning, her dad confronted her after finding empty bottles hidden under her bed. "What are you doing, Chloe?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. "Do you have any idea how stupid this is?" Chloe just smirked. "Relax, Dad. I'm fine. You're overreacting." Her nonchalant attitude infuriated him, but there was also a flicker of fear in his eyes. He and Chloe's mother had always provided for her, hoping to give her the best life possible. Now, they wondered if they'd made a mistake. Had they spoiled her too much? Let her off the hook one too many times? They couldn't help but feel responsible for the person she was becoming. Despite their efforts, Chloe continued down her destructive path. After the mailbox incident and her court appearance, Judge Ellis gave her a chance to make things right. Sobriety testing was supposed to be a wake-up call, a reminder of the stakes if she kept making reckless choices. But Chloe didn't see it that way. To her, it was just another inconvenience, another rule meant to cramp her style. The day of her first scheduled test arrived, and Chloe barely glanced at the reminder note stuck to her bathroom mirror. Instead, she spent hours scrolling through social media, laughing at memes and texting her friends. When her mom reminded her it was time to leave, Chloe rolled her eyes. "I don't have time for that," she said dismissively. "Tell them I'll come next week." Her mom sighed. "Chloe, this isn't optional. If you miss it, you'll get in trouble." "Whatever." Chloe shot back, already distracted by her phone. "They can't do anything to me." That confidence was misplaced. Missing the test didn't go unnoticed. Within days, a letter arrived summoning her back to court for violating her probation. Chloe brushed it off, convinced it was no big deal. "Mom, seriously, chill," she said when her mom urged her to take it seriously. "It's not like they're gonna throw me in jail or something." Her arrogance blinded her to the reality of the situation. She failed to see that every action has consequences, even for someone like her. While she laughed off the summons, her lawyer grew increasingly concerned. "Chloe," he warned during a brief meeting, "Judge Ellis isn't playing games. Skipping your sobriety test shows a complete disregard for the law. You need to start taking this seriously." Chloe rolled her eyes again. "Yeah, okay, got it." She walked into the courtroom for her second hearing dressed in ripped jeans and a leather jacket, chewing gum loudly and whispering jokes to her friends seated behind her. As the judge reviewed the evidence against her, Chloe leaned back in her chair, completely unfazed. When Judge Ellis asked why she missed the test, Chloe shrugged. "I forgot," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "No big deal, right?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even her own parents looked mortified. Judge Ellis stared at her, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Chloe thought she might get away with it. After all, hadn't she always managed to skate by without facing real consequences? But this time was different. This time, Judge Ellis decided enough was enough. What happened next would shock everyone, including Chloe, and force her to confront the harsh truths she'd been avoiding her entire life. The courtroom was quiet, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of papers. Chloe Harper walked in like she owned the place, her ripped jeans and leather jacket standing out against the formal suits and neat dresses around her. She chewed gum loudly, snapping it between her teeth, as if to remind everyone how little she cared about being there. Her friends sat a few rows behind her, whispering jokes and giggling under their breath. To them, this was just another spectacle, a chance to watch Chloe play her favorite role, the rebel who couldn't be tamed. Chloe's parents, on the other hand, looked anything but amused. They sat stiffly in their seats, their faces pale with worry. Her mom clutched her purse tightly, while her dad stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Both of them had begged Chloe to take this seriously, but she brushed them off with an eye roll and a muttered whatever. Now, as they watched her strut toward the front of the room, they exchanged anxious glances. This wasn't going to end well. Judge Margaret Ellis entered the courtroom moments later, her presence commanding immediate silence. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through anyone who dared challenge her authority. Everyone stood as she took her seat, except Chloe, who remained slouched in her chair until her lawyer nudged her sharply. Rolling her eyes, she finally got to her feet, only to plop back down the second the judge sat. "Miss Harper," Judge Ellis began, her voice firm and steady. "You are here today because you failed to comply with the terms of your probation. Specifically, you missed a scheduled sobriety test. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Chloe smirked, leaning back in her chair like she was lounging at home. "Yeah, I forgot," she said casually, hopping her gum. "No big deal, right?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even her friends stopped laughing, sensing that something was about to go very wrong. Judge Ellis narrowed her eyes, studying Chloe carefully. There was no fear in the girl's expression, no hint of remorse, only arrogance. It was clear she thought she could charm or bully her way out of trouble, just like she always had. "Miss Harper," the judge continued, her tone icy now, "let me make one thing perfectly clear. This court does not tolerate defiance. Your actions, or lack thereof, show a blatant disregard for the law and for the safety of others. Driving under the influence is not a minor offense. You endangered lives, including your own, and yet, instead of taking responsibility, you've chosen to mock the system designed to help you." Chloe shifted uncomfortably for the first time, though she still tried to mask it with bravado. "I already said sorry," she mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "What more do you want from me?" "I want accountability." Judge Ellis shot back, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Apologies mean nothing unless they're followed by action. You've shown no effort to change your behavior. Skipping your sobriety test proves that." For a brief moment, Chloe faltered. She glanced at her parents, who refused to meet her gaze, then at her friends, who suddenly looked uneasy, but her pride wouldn't let her back down completely. Instead, she crossed her arms and muttered, "Fine. Whatever. Just tell me what I have to do so we can move on." Judge Ellis leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. "That's exactly what we're going to do, Miss Harper. However, don't expect leniency this time. You've left me no choice but to take drastic measures." Chloe froze, her confidence wavering. For the first time, she actually listened, her mind racing as the judge outlined what came next. The courtroom grew deathly silent, every pair of eyes fixed on Judge Ellis. Even Chloe's lawyer looked startled, flipping nervously through his notes. "You will spend 1 month living undercover in a low-income neighborhood," Judge Ellis declared, her words hitting like a thunderclap. "During this time, you will work a minimum wage job, adhere to strict curfews, and live without access to your phone, car, or credit cards. If you fail to comply, you will face immediate incarceration. Do you understand?" Chloe's jaw dropped. "Wait. What? That's insane," she blurted out, forgetting where she was for a moment. "You can't make me do that." "I assure you, Miss Harper," Judge Ellis replied calmly, "I can, and I will. Consider this an opportunity to learn humility and accountability. Maybe then you'll realize just how fortunate you are." Chloe opened her mouth to protest again, but her lawyer quickly silenced her with a warning glance. As the judge finalized the sentence, Chloe sat frozen in shock, her world tilting on its axis. For the first time in her life, she realized she couldn't talk her way out of this. Whatever happened next, she would have to face it alone, and it terrified her. The courtroom buzzed with disbelief after Judge Ellis delivered her verdict. Chloe Harper sat frozen in her seat, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. 1 month living in a low-income neighborhood? No phone? No car? Working a minimum wage job. It sounded like something out of a nightmare, or maybe a reality TV show. But this wasn't entertainment, it was real life, and Chloe had no idea how to handle it. Her parents were the first to react. Her mom buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks, while her dad leaned forward, gripping the edge of his seat. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling, "isn't this excessive? She's just a kid. Can't we find another way?" Judge Ellis turned her piercing gaze toward him. "Mr. Harper, your daughter has shown zero regard for the rules or the safety of others. This isn't about punishment. It's about teaching her lessons she desperately needs to learn. Privilege has shielded her from understanding accountability. Perhaps experiencing life without those privileges will finally get through to her." Chloe's dad opened his mouth to argue further, but his wife placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Let it go," she whispered, shaking her head. They both knew fighting the judge would only make things worse. 2 days later, Chloe stood outside a small, run-down apartment building clutching a single duffel bag containing the bare essentials: a few changes of clothes, toiletries, and a prepaid debit card loaded with just enough money to cover rent and groceries for the month. Gone were her designer outfits, her expensive makeup, and her perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore a plain hoodie and jeans, looking more like a shadow of her former self. A social worker named Lisa greeted her at the door. "Welcome to your new home," Lisa said brightly, though her smile faltered when she saw Chloe's scowl. "I'll show you around and explain how things work here." Chloe followed reluctantly, dragging her feet as they climbed the creaky stairs to the second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, and the walls were painted a dull gray that seemed to suck the light out of the space. When Lisa unlocked the door to Chloe's temporary home, the sight inside made her stomach churn. The apartment was tiny, a cramped living room connected to an even smaller kitchen, one bedroom, and a bathroom. The furniture looked decades old, and the linoleum floors were scratched and stained. "This is where I'm supposed to live?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "Are you kidding me?" Lisa crossed her arms, unfazed by Chloe's attitude. "It's not a 5-star hotel, but it's clean and safe. And trust me, plenty of people would be grateful to have it." Chloe rolled her eyes but didn't respond. She dropped her bag onto the sagging couch and glanced around, already plotting ways to escape this nightmare. Maybe she could convince her parents to pay off the judge or hire a better lawyer, or maybe she could just refuse to stay here altogether. But Lisa quickly shut down any ideas of rebellion. "Listen up," she said firmly. "You're required to check in with me every week. If you skip out early, the police will arrest you. Got it?" Chloe gritted her teeth. "Yeah, I got it." After Lisa left, Chloe collapsed onto the couch, staring at the cracked ceiling. For the first time in her life, she felt completely alone. There was no one to bail her out, no one to fix her problems for her. She hated it. And yet, deep down, part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, she deserved this. The next morning, Chloe reported to her assigned workplace, a bustling diner called Joe's Kitchen. Her uniform consisted of a faded polo shirt and black sneakers, which she despised instantly. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Rita, wasted no time putting her to work. "You'll be bussing tables today," Rita said curtly, handing her a tray. "Don't screw it up." Chloe spent the day rushing between tables, clearing dirty dishes and dodging impatient customers. By lunchtime, her feet ached, her arms felt like lead, and her pride was bruised beyond repair. For the first time, she understood what hard work really meant, and she hated every second of it. That night, as she lay on the lumpy mattress in her tiny apartment, Chloe stared at the ceiling again, her mind racing. She had always thought she was untouchable, invincible. Now, stripped of everything she took for granted, she realized how wrong she had been. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a wake-up call, whether she liked it or not. Chloe Harper was about to face the toughest lesson of her life. Chloe Harper's first week in the low-income neighborhood felt like an eternity. Every day brought new challenges, each one chipping away at the armor of arrogance she had worn for so long. At Joe's Kitchen, her job as a busser was grueling and relentless. She quickly learned that customers didn't care about her feelings or her background. They just wanted their food fast and their tables clean. Some were polite, tossing her a quick thank you as they left. Others snapped at her when their coffee took too long or complained loudly if their fries weren't crispy enough. The first few shifts left Chloe exhausted and frustrated. Her hands were raw from scrubbing sticky countertops, and her back ached from carrying heavy trays, stacked high with dirty dishes. When a particularly rude customer yelled at her for mixing up his order, Chloe stormed into the kitchen, tears stinging her eyes. I can't do this, she shouted at Rita, the manager. These people are impossible. Rita raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Welcome to the real world, sweetheart. You think you're the only one who has bad days? Suck it up and get back out there. Chloe wanted to argue, to quit on the spot, but she knew she couldn't. If she walked away, she'd end up in jail, and that thought scared her more than anything else. So, she swallowed her pride, wiped her tears, and returned to work. Living in the tiny apartment wasn't much better. The walls were thin, and Chloe could hear every argument, every slammed door, and every late-night party happening around her. Her neighbors weren't wealthy or glamorous. They were struggling families, single parents juggling multiple jobs, and elderly people living on fixed incomes. At first, Chloe judged them harshly, convinced they were lazy or unmotivated. But as the days passed, she began to notice things she hadn't before. "Hey," Chloe said awkwardly. "You okay?" Maria glanced up, surprised to see Chloe standing there. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just stuff." Chloe sat down beside her, unsure why she even cared. Maybe it was boredom, maybe curiosity, or maybe something deeper she couldn't quite name. After a moment, Maria started talking. She explained how she was raising 2 kids on her own, working long hours to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Rent was due soon, and she wasn't sure she'd have enough money to cover it. "It's hard," Maria admitted softly. "But I don't have a choice. My kids need me." For the first time in her life, Chloe felt a pang of guilt. Here was someone dealing with real problems, actual hardships, and yet Maria still showed up to work every day with a smile, doing whatever it took to provide for her family. Chloe had never known what it meant to struggle like that. Back home, her biggest worry had been whether her parents would buy her the latest designer handbag. Over the next few days, Chloe found herself observing the people around her more closely. She noticed the elderly man across the hall who struggled to carry his groceries upstairs, so she offered to help, even though she hated feeling inconvenienced. She saw the single mom down the street who worked nights and relied on her teenage daughter to watch the younger kids. Slowly but surely, Chloe began to understand that life wasn't fair, and not everyone got second chances or safety nets. At work, her attitude started to shift too. Instead of complaining about difficult customers, she tried to see things from their perspective. Maybe the man yelling about his cold coffee was having a terrible day. Maybe the woman snapping at her was stressed about bills or sick family members. It didn't excuse their behavior, but it made it easier to let go of her anger. By the end of the week, Chloe realized something surprising. She wasn't completely miserable anymore. Sure, the work was still exhausting, and the apartment was far from luxurious, but she no longer felt that she was drowning. For the first time in her life, she was learning what it meant to push through challenges, to rely on herself instead of others. More importantly, she was starting to see the world through someone else's eyes. One afternoon, after a particularly busy lunch rush, Rita pulled Chloe aside. "Not bad today," she said gruffly, though there was a hint of approval in her voice. "Keep it up." Chloe blinked, caught off guard by the rare compliment. "Thanks," she muttered, unsure how to respond. As she walked home that evening, Chloe allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't proud of everything she'd done, or everything she'd been, but for the first time, she felt like she might actually be capable of change. This experience wasn't just punishment anymore. It was shaping her into someone stronger, humbler, and more aware of the world around her. And deep down, she knew that was exactly what she needed. As the weeks went by, Chloe Harper began to notice subtle changes within herself, changes she hadn't expected and certainly didn't ask for. Living in the low-income neighborhood wasn't just teaching her how to survive. It was slowly reshaping the way she saw the world. The people around her weren't faceless strangers anymore. They were real individuals with stories, struggles, and strengths that mirrored her own in unexpected ways. Maria became a regular presence in Chloe's life. After their initial conversation on the steps, they started talking more often. Sometimes it was brief exchanges during shifts at Joe's kitchen, other times longer chats while waiting for the bus or sitting outside after work. Maria never sugarcoated her reality, but she also didn't dwell on self-pity. Instead, she spoke about her kids with pride, sharing funny anecdotes about their antics or describing how hard they studied despite their circumstances. Listening to her, Chloe couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and shame. admiration because Maria worked tirelessly without complaint, and shame because she had spent so much of her own life taking everything for granted. One Saturday afternoon, Maria invited Chloe over to her apartment to meet her children. At first, Chloe hesitated, unsure if she belonged in such an intimate setting. But Maria insisted, saying, "You've been helping me out lately. It's only fair you meet the reason I do all this." That evening, as Chloe walked back to her apartment, she felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her. Gratitude. Not the kind she felt when someone bought her a gift or praised her achievements, but a deeper, quieter appreciation for the little things like kindness, effort, and connection. She thought about her own parents, who had always provided for her yet often seemed distant, caught up in their careers and social obligations. Had she ever truly thanked them for what they did, or had she simply expected it, like everything else in her privileged life? The next day at work, Chloe found herself volunteering to cover another waitress's shift when the woman called in sick. It wasn't something she would have done before. In fact, she probably would have rolled her eyes and complained about having to pick up extra work. But now, remembering Maria's dedication to her family, Chloe understood the importance of stepping up when others needed help. When Rita raised an eyebrow in surprise, Chloe shrugged and said, "Someone's got to do it, right?" Her growing empathy extended beyond Maria and her coworkers. One evening, while walking home from the grocery store, Chloe noticed the elderly man across the hall struggling to carry his bags upstairs. Without thinking, she rushed over and offered to help. He smiled gratefully, introducing himself as Mr. Patel. Over the next few days, they exchanged pleasantries whenever they crossed paths, and Chloe learned that he lived alone since his wife passed away. Though he rarely asked for assistance, Chloe made it a point to check on him occasionally, bringing him leftovers from Joe's kitchen or simply stopping by to chat. These small acts of kindness began to change Chloe in ways she hadn't anticipated. For the first time, she felt useful, not because someone told her she was smart or talented, but because she was making a difference, however small, in someone else's life. It was humbling, yet empowering, to realize that even someone like her could contribute something meaningful. By the end of her third week, Chloe no longer dreaded waking up early for her shift at the diner. In fact, she looked forward to it, knowing she'd see familiar faces and hear snippets of their lives. Her coworkers, who had initially dismissed her as spoiled or entitled, started treating her differently too. They joked with her, shared tips for dealing with difficult customers, and even included her in after-work gatherings at a nearby park. Chloe still missed parts of her old life, the comfort of her bed, the freedom of her phone, the ease of ordering takeout whenever she wanted. But those cravings felt less urgent now. She was beginning to understand that happiness didn't come from material possessions or endless privileges. It came from connections, from purpose, from knowing you mattered to someone, even in small ways. One night, as she lay awake listening to the faint hum of traffic outside her window, Chloe reflected on how far she'd come. Just a month ago, she had walked into Judge Ellis's courtroom smirking, convinced the world owed her something. Now, stripped of everything she once relied on, she was discovering who she really was, and who she wanted to become. This experience wasn't just punishment, it was redemption, and for the first time in her life, Chloe felt ready to embrace it. By the final week of her sentence, Chloe Harper was almost unrecognizable from the arrogant teenager who had first walked into Judge Ellis's courtroom. The transformation wasn't just physical, though her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair were long gone, but emotional and mental as well. She carried herself differently now, with less swagger and more awareness. Her sharp tongue had softened, replaced by a willingness to listen and learn. Even her posture seemed less defensive, as if she no longer needed to shield herself from the world. Her last shift at Joe's kitchen was bittersweet. As she cleared tables and refilled coffee cups, her coworkers teased her about leaving them behind. "You better not forget us when you go back to your fancy life," joked Carlos, one of the cooks, flipping a pancake with dramatic flair. "I won't," Chloe replied earnestly, surprising even herself with how much she meant it. These people, her coworkers, her neighbors, Maria, and her kids, Mr. Patel, they had become part of her story in ways she couldn't have imagined. They hadn't judged her for her past mistakes. Instead, they'd accepted her flaws and celebrated her progress. For the first time, Chloe felt like she belonged somewhere, not because of her wealth or status, but because of who she was becoming. Rita pulled her aside before closing time. "You've come a long way, kid," she said, leaning against the counter. "When you first showed up here, I thought you quit within a day. But look at you now." Back at her tiny apartment, Chloe spent her final evening reflecting on everything she'd learned. The walls that once felt suffocating now seemed comforting, like they held memories of late-night conversations with Maria and quiet moments of self-discovery. She packed her duffel bag slowly, folding each item carefully, as if trying to preserve the significance of every piece of clothing she'd worn during this journey. The next morning, Lisa, the social worker, arrived to escort her back to the courthouse for her final hearing. As they drove through the streets of the neighborhood, Chloe rolled down the window, letting the cool air brush against her face. She took in the sights: the corner store where she bought snacks after long shifts, the park where she'd laughed with coworkers, the bus stop where she waited countless mornings. Each place reminded her of lessons learned and friendships forged. When they reached the courthouse, Chloe stepped out of the car with a mix of nervousness and resolve. This was it, the moment of truth. Would Judge Ellis see the changes in her, or would she dismiss them as temporary? Inside the courtroom, Chloe stood before Judge Ellis, her heart pounding. Her parents sat in the front row, their expressions anxious yet hopeful. For once, Chloe didn't roll her eyes or slouch in defiance. Instead, she stood tall, meeting the judge's gaze with sincerity. "Miss Harper," Judge Ellis began, her tone measured but not unkind, "your sentence is complete. Do you have anything to say?" Chloe swallowed hard, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Yes, Your Honor. First, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. Before, I thought I knew everything. I thought the world owed me something. But living here, working at the diner, meeting people who struggle every single day, it taught me things I never understood before. It taught me humility, responsibility, and most importantly, empathy. I'm sorry for the way I acted before. I promise to keep learning and doing better." The courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Ellis looked surprised, though her expression quickly softened. "Miss Harper," she said after a pause, "I must admit, I wasn't sure what to expect today. Based on your words and your actions over the past month, I believe you've made significant progress. Remember, true redemption comes from continued effort. Don't let this experience fade into memory. Use it to guide your future choices." Chloe nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I will, Your Honor. Thank you." As the judge dismissed the case, Chloe turned to her parents, who rushed forward to hug her tightly. Her mom whispered, "We're so proud of you," while her dad patted her shoulder, his eyes glistening. For the first time in years, Chloe felt truly connected to them, not as providers or authority figures, but as family. Outside the courthouse, Chloe paused to take a deep breath. The sun warmed her skin, and a sense of peace washed over her. She knew her journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead, moments when her old habits might tempt her to slip back. But she also knew she had the tools to face them: resilience, gratitude, and a newfound understanding of the value of hard work and human connection. For the first time in her life, Chloe Harper felt grounded and ready to build a future worth fighting for. Chloe Harper's return home felt surreal, like stepping into a dream she had almost forgotten. Her parents' sprawling house, once a symbol of comfort and privilege, now seemed foreign to her. The marble floors gleamed brighter than she remembered. The chandeliers sparkled with an almost blinding light, and the silence echoed through the empty halls. For weeks, she had lived in cramped spaces filled with noise and life. Now the luxury surrounding her felt hollow without the warmth of community she'd grown to cherish. Her parents tried their best to welcome her back, cooking her favorite meals and setting up movie nights to ease her transition. But Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She missed Maria's laughter, Mr. Padel's stories, and even the chaos of Joe's kitchen during rush hour. Most of all, she missed the sense of purpose she found in helping others. Not because it made her look good, but because it genuinely mattered. One evening, as her mom served dessert, Chloe finally spoke what had been weighing on her mind. "I think I want to volunteer at a shelter," she said quietly, twirling her fork in her hand. "Or maybe find some way to give back. I don't know, I just feel like I can't go back to how things were before." Her parents exchanged surprised glances before her dad nodded slowly. "That sounds like a great idea, Chloe. We're proud of you for thinking about others." It wasn't long before Chloe started volunteering at a local community center. At first, she helped serve meals to families struggling to make ends meet, remembering how Maria juggled work and parenting with grace under pressure. Then she began tutoring kids after school, teaching them math and reading while learning patience and kindness herself. Each interaction reminded her of the lessons she'd absorbed during her month in the low-income neighborhood, that everyone has value, no matter where they come from, and that small acts of compassion can change lives, including her own. Word eventually spread among her old friends that Chloe had changed. Some mocked her behind her back, calling her boring or too serious. Others, however, noticed the sincerity in her voice when she talked about her experiences and decided to join her efforts. One Saturday morning, 3 of her former classmates showed up at the community center to help organize a food drive. By the end of the day, they were laughing and joking together, not about parties or gossip, but about the joy of seeing grateful smiles on people's faces. Chloe also reconnected with Maria, visiting her often to catch up and offer assistance whenever needed. On one such visit, Maria handed her a framed drawing done by her youngest child. "This is for you," Maria said with a smile. "She says you're her hero." Chloe stared at the colorful picture, tears welling up in her eyes. It depicted 2 stick figures holding hands, one labeled Maria and the other Chloe. Beneath it, scrawled in childish handwriting, were the words, "Asterisk, thank you for being my friend asterisk." For Chloe, the drawing became a treasured keepsake, a reminder of how far she'd come and the impact she could have on others. She hung it proudly in her room, next to photos of her family and notes from the people she'd met along her journey. As months passed, Chloe continued to grow. She started journaling regularly, documenting her thoughts and reflections to ensure she never lost sight of her newfound values. She also took steps to mend relationships she damaged in the past, apologizing sincerely to teachers, coaches, and acquaintances she treated poorly. Though not everyone forgave her immediately, Chloe didn't let rejection deter her. She understood that redemption wasn't instant, it required consistent effort. When graduation rolled around, Chloe delivered a heartfelt speech as valedictorian of her class. Standing at the podium, she looked out at the sea of faces and spoke candidly about her mistakes and transformation. "I used to think success meant having money, power, or popularity," she admitted. "But real success is about making a difference, in your own life and in the lives of others. None of us are perfect, but we all have the power to choose who we want to be, and I chose to be better." The audience erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. Even Judge Ellis, seated near the front row with a faint smile, gave a subtle nod of approval. Looking back on her journey, Chloe knew she still had much to learn, but she also knew she was no longer the same person who had walked into that courtroom months ago. She had faced her flaws head-on, endured hardships she once thought unimaginable, and emerged stronger, humbler, and more compassionate. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, Chloe faced it with confidence. For the first time in her life, she truly believed she was enough.